Hello, Grim Histories fans! Welcome back to the channel where history gets, well, grim. Tonight we delve into a story so twisted, so paradoxical, it's practically a medieval horror story come to life. We're talking about the Malleus Maleficarum, a book so infamous, so influential, it's practically synonymous with the witch hunts. But here's the kicker, was it actually banned? The common narrative paints the Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, as a forbidden text, a dark grimoire whispered about in hushed tones, secretly fueling the fires of the Inquisition. A book so evil, its mere existence was a threat to society, but that's not quite the whole story. In fact, it's a far more unsettling truth. Imagine this, the year is 1486. Europe is still reeling from the Black Death, a chilling reminder of humanity's fragility. Superstition and fear are rampant. And then two Dominican inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, unleash their masterpiece upon the world, a meticulously detailed, meticulously wrong guide to identifying, prosecuting, and executing witches. This wasn't some obscure pamphlet. This was a comprehensive 280-page tome, a scholarly work endorsed by the Pope himself. This isn't some dusty manuscript hidden away in a forgotten monastery. This was a bestseller, a runaway success, a book that ironically found its way into the hands of judges, magistrates, and, well, anyone who could afford a copy. Did I mention that a group of highly respected theologians at the University of Cologne vehemently opposed its publication? They saw it not as a holy writ, but as a dangerous concoction of theological errors, dubious legal practices, and downright misogyny. They saw the flaws, the logical leaps, the sheer brutality, and they condemned it. But their condemnation was like a pebble thrown into a raging river. It barely made a ripple. Why? Because the Malleus Maleficarum was riding a tidal wave of a completely different sort, the printing press. Gutenberg's revolutionary invention had democratized information in a way never before seen. Suddenly, knowledge, even knowledge as twisted as Kramer and Sprenger's, could spread like wildfire, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of academia and religious authority. The learned men of Cologne could denounce it, but the judges could buy it. The common folk could buy it. And they did. The Malleus Maleficarum wasn't banned. It was printed, it was read, it was used. And that, my friends, is where the real horror story begins. The irony stings, doesn't it? A book condemned by the scholarly elite became the most influential text on witch hunting. A work riddled with theological and legal holes became the justification for countless executions. A testament to the power of the printing press, yes, but also a chilling reminder of how easily fear, misinformation, and prejudice can spread, especially when fueled by a seemingly authoritative source. So, was the Malleus Maleficarum banned? Officially, no, not initially. But its story is far more complex than a simple banned book narrative. It's a story of academic infighting, technological revolution, and the terrifying consequences of unchecked power. A story will unravel further in the next part. Now, let's rewind the clock to 1486. The ink on the Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, was barely dry, and already a storm was brewing, not the kind conjured by cackling hags on a moonlit heath, but a tempest of furious scholarly debate. The air in the hallowed halls of the University of Cologne, one of Europe's most prestigious centers of learning, crackled with indignation. These weren't just any scholars. These were the intellectual heavyweights of their age, theologians whose pronouncements held immense sway, and they were livid. Imagine the scene. Sunbeams slanting through the stained glass windows, illuminating dusty tomes and the furrowed brows of learned men. The whispers initially started low, a murmuring dissent against the brazen claims of Sprenger and Kramer, the authors of this controversial tome. But soon the whispers escalated into a full-blown academic shouting match. Why? What had unleashed this academic fury? It wasn't simply disagreement. It was a fundamental challenge to the very foundations of their theological understanding. The Malleus Maleficarum, while ostensibly a guide for prosecuting witches, was riddled with what these Cologne theologians saw as egregious errors in both theology and morality. The book's authors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, had woven together a tapestry of scripture, folklore, and misogynistic conjecture, creating a frighteningly persuasive but ultimately flawed narrative. First, the Malleus presented a dangerously simplistic view of demonic influence. It asserted that witches wielded their power through explicit pacts with the devil, a direct affront to the nuanced understanding of temptation and sin held by many theologians. The Cologne scholars argued that the Malleus' rigid framework left little room for the complexities of human faith and free will, a central tenet of their faith. It painted a picture of humanity far too susceptible to demonic manipulation, undermining the very notion of individual moral agency. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the Malleus was dripping with misogyny. It portrayed women as inherently weaker, more susceptible to temptation, and therefore more likely to conspire with the devil. This blatant sexism was anathema to many within the university. While the prevailing societal norms of the time certainly weren't exactly feminist, the Malleus went far beyond reflecting these norms. It actively fueled and exacerbated existing prejudices. The Cologne theologians saw this as a dangerous distortion of Christian teachings, a perversion of Scripture used to justify misogynistic persecution. The Malleus' methodology was also under fire. Its reliance on spectral evidence testimony about dreams, visions, and other subjective experiences was considered unreliable and potentially dangerous. The Cologne scholars emphasized the importance of concrete evidence and due process, a principle often disregarded by those eager to use the Malleus as a justification for witch hunts. They saw the book's acceptance as a potential slide into a world of injustice and arbitrary accusations, a chilling prospect in a society already grappling with violence and instability. Their condemnations weren't whispered behind closed doors. They were formal, documented objections. These weren't just personal opinions. They represented the considered judgment of some of the most respected theological minds of the era. Their powerful critique, however, was ultimately unsuccessful in stopping the book's spread. The Malleus Maleficarum became a bestseller, a testament to the unforeseen power of the printing press to bypass the established academic gatekeepers and reach a far wider and far more dangerous audience. The clash between academic scrutiny and popular dissemination had only just begun. The year is 1486, imagine, if you will. The scent of freshly printed ink, a smell so revolutionary, so potent, it would forever alter the course of history. Not just the history of books, mind you, but the history of fear itself. For it was in this year, thanks to the relatively recent invention of Johannes Gutenberg's printing press, that the Malleus Maleficarum, despite the stinging condemnation of Cologne's elite theologians, began its terrifying ascent to become a global bestseller. A bestseller of fear, a bestseller of witch hunts. We've established that the Malleus was far from universally embraced by the academic community. Its theological inconsistencies and morally dubious arguments were flagged by some of the sharpest minds in Europe. But the learned professors of Cologne, with their quill pens and parchment scrolls, were no match for the relentless churn of Gutenberg's press. This machine, a mechanical marvel born from the burgeoning Renaissance, democratized knowledge in a way no one had previously conceived. Think of it, before the printing press, the dissemination of ideas was a painstakingly slow process. Books were painstakingly hand-copied, often by monks in secluded monasteries, making them extraordinarily expensive and rare. Control over information rested firmly in the hands of the church and the elite. But Gutenberg's invention shattered that control. Suddenly, books, even controversial ones, could be mass-produced. Copies of the Malleus, once confined to the dusty shelves of select libraries, began to spill out onto the streets, into the hands of judges, inquisitors, and even the common folk. The very scholars who had condemned the book's flawed logic found themselves powerless against its proliferation. Their carefully crafted critiques couldn't compete with the sheer volume of Malleus copies flooding the market. The printing press had become a weapon, and the Malleus was its perfectly sharpened blade. Picture this, a traveling merchant, his cart laden not with silks and spices, but with stacks upon stacks of the infamous grimoire. He arrives in a small, isolated village, a place where superstitions run rampant and fear is a constant companion. He sets up his stall, not in the town square, but perhaps in a dimly lit corner, whispering his wares to those seeking answers or perhaps justifications for their anxieties. The villagers, many of them illiterate, wouldn't understand the theological debates that raged in the universities. They would only see the terrifying illustrations, the lurid tales of witchcraft, and the seemingly authoritative pronouncements on how to identify and punish witches. The Malleus became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Its descriptions of demonic pacts and supernatural powers, however dubious, provided a framework for understanding unexplained events, illnesses, and misfortunes. Suddenly, a bad harvest wasn't just bad luck. It was the work of a malevolent witch. A child's illness wasn't a disease, it was a curse. And the Malleus, with its detailed instructions on how to identify and interrogate suspected witches, offered a seemingly straightforward solution to these deeply rooted fears. The irony, of course, is breathtaking. The very technology intended to spread knowledge and enlightenment inadvertently became a tool for propagating fear and persecution. The printing press, a symbol of the burgeoning Renaissance, was instrumental in fueling the dark fires of the witch hunts. The academic elite, who rightly criticized the Malleus' theological and moral failings, were outmaneuvered by the unstoppable force of mass production. Their learned arguments couldn't compete with the sheer volume of a commercially successful, terrifying book. This was the paradox of the Malleus Maleficarum, a theological treatise condemned by scholars, yet elevated to the status of a bestseller by the very forces that were meant to illuminate the world. Let's step away from the dusty pages of the Malleus Maleficarum for a moment, and into the chilling reality it helped create. We've established that despite the condemnation of esteemed theologians, the book became a runaway success, thanks to Gutenberg's revolutionary printing press. But what did that success mean? What was the real-world impact of this supposedly banned text that painted such a vivid, terrifying picture of witchcraft? The answer, my friends, is horrifyingly simple. It fueled the flames of the witch hunts. The Malleus, far from being a theoretical treatise gathering dust on scholars' shelves, became the handbook for inquisitors, judges, and even ordinary villagers eager to identify, accuse, and condemn those they suspected of consorting with the devil. Imagine, if you will, a small village nestled deep within the German forests. A farmer's livestock dies mysteriously. A child falls ill. A crop fails. Before the Malleus, these events might have been attributed to bad luck, disease, or the unpredictable whims of nature. But now, thanks to the accessibility of this infamous guide, a new explanation emerges, whispered in hushed tones around crackling fires: witchcraft. The Malleus provided a meticulously detailed framework for identifying witches. It described the telltale signs, the devil's mark, the ability to fly, the power to conjure storms. It outlined the methods of interrogation, methods that were, to put it mildly, anything but gentle. We're talking about torture, of course. The rack, the thumbscrews, the waterboarding, all deployed with a chilling efficiency, guided by the very text that claimed to be exposing the evils of witchcraft. The book's influence extended beyond the physical instruments of torture. It shaped the very mindset of those involved in the witch hunts. It validated their suspicions, justifying their actions with the weight of pseudo-scholarly authority. The Malleus didn't just provide procedures. It provided permission. Permission to inflict unimaginable suffering, to tear apart families, to destroy lives in the name of religious zeal and the eradication of an imagined threat. Think about the insidious nature of this. The very act of confession, so central to the witch trials, was often extracted through torture. The Malleus itself even acknowledges the potential for false confessions, but dismisses it as irrelevant. The text argues that even if a confession is forced, it's still valid because it demonstrates the inherent guilt of the accused, their susceptibility to the devil's influence. This is a twisted logic, a perversion of justice that condemned countless innocent individuals. One chilling detail stands out: the book's emphasis on the supposed sexual nature of witchcraft. The Malleus describes witches as engaging in orgies with the devil, a grotesque and fantastical claim that allowed inquisitors to focus their investigations on women, particularly older, independent women who often lacked the protection of male relatives. This added a layer of misogyny to the already brutal reality of the witch hunts. The sheer number of victims is staggering, and the details of their suffering are too gruesome to fully recount here. But it is essential to understand that the Malleus Maleficarum, despite the initial condemnation by some leading theologians, became a powerful tool of oppression, a catalyst for widespread violence and injustice. It is a stark reminder of the dangerous intersection of religious fanaticism, unchecked power, and the mass dissemination of information, even if that information is demonstrably false. The Malleus Maleficarum's legacy is not one of a mere academic debate confined to university halls. It is a blood-soaked testament to the terrible consequences of unchecked authority and the manipulation of fear. It's a chilling reminder that even a banned book can become a devastating force, shaping the course of history in ways its authors could never have imagined. So, the Malleus Maleficarum, this infamous grimoire of witchcraft, fueled centuries of fear, torture, and execution. But here is the truly unsettling twist. Its very excesses might have inadvertently sown the seeds of its own demise. We've seen how its popularity, ironically boosted by the printing press, spread its poisonous ideology far and wide. But the sheer scale of the witch hunts, the horrific details laid bare in countless accounts, began to breed a different kind of reaction. Think about it. The sheer volume of accusations, the inconsistencies in testimonies, the reliance on torture to extract confessions, all of this began to unravel under the scrutiny of a slowly awakening critical mind. The Enlightenment, that glorious age of reason, wasn't a sudden burst of brilliance but a gradual shift in intellectual climate. And the Malleus, in its grotesque overreach, played a crucial, albeit unintended, role. The relentless application of the Malleus's guidelines exposed its own internal contradictions. Judges and even some inquisitors, weary of the endless stream of accusations and the moral compromises involved, began to question the very foundations of the book's arguments. Were these truly demonic acts, or were they the product of mass hysteria, social anxieties, and perhaps even deliberate malice? The very mechanisms that the Malleus sought to establish to identify and eliminate witchcraft inadvertently revealed its inherent flaws. The reliance on spectral evidence, testimony about events witnessed in dreams or visions, proved notoriously unreliable. Its subjective nature prone to manipulation and misinterpretation. The inconsistencies between different accounts, the often absurd nature of the accusations, started to become glaringly obvious. The seeds of doubt were sown. Think of it as a slow, agonizing unraveling of a meticulously woven tapestry of fear. As scholars and thinkers began to prioritize reason and empirical observation over blind faith and superstition, the Malleus's pseudo-scientific pronouncements and reliance on outdated theological arguments began to crumble. The very excesses of the witch hunts, fueled by the Malleus, ultimately exposed their own inherent absurdity. This isn't to say that belief in witchcraft vanished overnight. The grip of superstition was tenacious, and the legacy of the Malleus continued to cast a long shadow. But the tide was turning. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, skepticism, and the scientific method, provided a powerful counter-narrative. The very excesses of the witch hunts, the sheer volume of suffering they caused, fueled a growing demand for a more rational and humane approach to justice. The Malleus Maleficarum, that once seemingly unstoppable force of religious dogma and fear, became a cautionary tale, a monument to the dangers of unchecked power and the seductive allure of unfounded accusations. It became a symbol of the very darkness that the Enlightenment sought to dispel. Ironically, in its attempt to solidify the power of the Church and suppress dissent, it inadvertently paved the way for a new era of intellectual and scientific inquiry. The book that sought to control the narrative ultimately became a victim of its own success. Its very proliferation led to its eventual downfall. The printing press, which initially served as its amplifier, ultimately became a tool for its undoing. The story of the Malleus Maleficarum isn't just about a book. It's about the clash between ancient superstitions and the burgeoning light of reason, a struggle played out on the battleground of human fear and belief. It's a reminder that even the most deeply entrenched ideas can be challenged and eventually overturned by the relentless pursuit of truth and the unwavering commitment to critical thinking. So, there you have it. The Malleus Maleficarum, a book initially condemned by the very scholars who held the keys to intellectual discourse, somehow became a runaway bestseller thanks to the revolutionary printing press. It transformed from a theological argument into a handbook for witch hunts, fueling a terrifying chapter in European history. We've journeyed through the academic squabbles of Cologne, witnessed the chilling efficiency of Gutenberg's invention in spreading fear, and seen the brutal consequences in the countless trials and executions that followed. But the story isn't simply one of a book's unexpected success. It's a chilling illustration of how easily unchecked information, even when flawed and morally reprehensible, can spread like wildfire, shaping societal beliefs and justifying unspeakable acts. The Malleus didn't simply document the witch hunts. It actively fueled them, a testament to the power of the printed word, a power that remains potent even today. The unanswered question, however, lingers: did the very act of condemning the Malleus paradoxically contribute to its success? Did the controversy surrounding the book, the whispers of its forbidden content, ironically increase its appeal and ensure its widespread distribution? The academic rejection intended to stifle its influence might have inadvertently amplified its reach. This is a chilling paradox for our modern age, where the fight against misinformation is just as crucial as the fight for free speech. The legacy of the Malleus Maleficarum is not just a grim reminder of historical brutality, but a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked narratives and the enduring power of the printed word, a power we still grapple with today. So, what are your theories? Do you believe the condemnation of the Malleus inadvertently led to its success? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Grim Histories for more dark and fascinating tales from history's hidden corners.